12-62, offered by Mr. Van Hollen of Maryland.
Pursuant to House Resolution 223, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen, and a member opposed each will control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could have order, please, Mr. Chairman.
The committee will please come to order. Please take all conversations off the floor. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our top priority in this Congress should be to support a robust economic recovery and put America back to work. That is what the Democratic plan does. It reduces the deficit in a steady, predictable way without slashing important investments in our kids' education and strategic national investments, without ending the Medicare guarantee, and without putting seniors, disabled individuals, and kids at risk who rely on Medicare. And it reduces the deficit in a balanced way by $1.2 trillion more than the President's budget and achieves primary balance in the year 2018. The Republican plan we've discussing is a narrow vision of America, a place with no shared sacrifice, a place where those who have benefited the most from what our country has to offer give little in return. The Democrats have a different vision for our country. We believe our strength springs not only from the undisputed benefits of a free people pursuing their ambitions and their dreams, but also from sometimes harnessing those talents for important national purposes. We believe America's greatness is rooted not only in a collection of individuals acting alone, but from our capacity to work together for the common good. We believe that is a patriotic vision of America. We do not see the government as an enemy, but as the imperfect instrument by which we can accomplish together as a people what no individual or single corporation can do alone. Small business owners recognize that they must make certain investments to build a successful enterprise. Similarly, our nation must make the strategic national investments necessary to keep our country strong in an increasingly global economic marketplace, and our plan does that. And we also believe we can do that while making cuts, and we make sensible, targeted cuts, but we do it in a smart way, not with a meat axe that threatens the fragile recovery. We also agree with the Fiscal Commission that security spending should be part of this debate. Admiral Mullins, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has stated, and I quote, that the most significant threat to our national security is our national debt. And there is growing bipartisan consensus that those security agencies must themselves be part of our effort to reduce our debt and strengthen our country. Our approach is a balanced one. We take cuts in the discretionary area and bring down that part of the budget to the lowest point as a percentage of the economy since the Eisenhower administration. We take cuts in other areas. We take cuts in mandatory programs, including agricultural subsidies. But we make different choices in the Republican budget. We end the subsidies to big oil rather than keeping those as we cut education for our kids. We ask the folks at the very top to pay the same tax rate they paid during the Clinton administration rather than end the Medicare guarantee and slash funding for seniors in nursing homes and others who rely on that support. So we make very different choices in this budget, but we accomplish the goal in a fiscally responsible way. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield myself 2 minutes. First of all, I want to start off by commending Mr. Van Hollen. It's not always that the minority offers an alternative budget. In fact, I know there are a lot of pressures not to do that. And so I think Mr. Van Hollen is to be commended and his very capable staff for actually proposing an alternative. That's important. It's important that we bring ideas to the table so we can have a real debate about ideas. So I want to start with saying that. Number two, we just have a different definition of fiscal responsibility, I suppose. This budget, relative to the mark, to the base budget we're talking about, increases spending by $4.5 trillion, raises taxes by $2 trillion, and it adds $2.4 trillion to the deficits compared to the base bill we're talking about here. It does exceed the President's budget in debt reduction, in deficit reduction. And so the gentleman is to be commended by that, but I personally think the President's budget is a pretty low watermark. It exceeds it by raising taxes another $210 billion and also cutting defense by $614 billion above the cuts that are in the base, our budget, and the President's budget. Secretary Gates has warned us that such cuts would leave the military unable to meet its current missions. And using his words, setting indiscriminate targets to scrimp on defense is math, not strategy, end quote. I think it's very important that we recognize our priorities. Number one, national defense is the primary responsibility of the federal government. When our war fighters tell us this doesn't allow them to have the tools to keep them safe, the equipment they need to prosecute their jobs, I think that's not responsible. When our economy is struggling to get out of very deep recession, over $2 trillion in tax increases, I just don't think is responsible. On the alternative, I think what we're offering is responsible. Our budget does four basic things. It gets the economy growing. It keeps taxes where they are and prevents massive tax increases. It saves our Medicare, Medicaid programs. It fulfills the mission of health and retirement security for all Americans by guaranteeing that people who've retired and are about to retire keep what they have, what they've organized their lives around, and then reforms these programs so that they're solvent and sustainable for the next generation. Number three, it repairs our social safety net so that it works, and it, number four, pays off our debt. That's what we do, and I yield back the balance of our time. Not the balance of our time, excuse me. Yeah, sorry, I yield back my time. Yeah.
The gentleman reserves.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Fiscal Commission said of the Republican plan it was an unbalanced approach. Our approach is a balanced approach. Secretary Gates' comments were directed to the Fiscal Commission's recommendations. Our proposals are in line with what the President outlined just the other day, and I would point out that Governor Haley Barbour said, if we Republicans don't propose some savings of money on defense, we will have no credibility on anything else. Of course, the Pentagon has never passed a GAO budget, and I think everybody who does budgets recognizes there's some savings to be found there. With that, I yield 3 minutes to distinguished Assistant Leader, Mr. Clyburn.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend for yielding me this time. We have heard from our Republican friends that they are transforming Medicare. They call it a move to premium support. They also say they're just fixing the flaws in Medicaid. They say they're being brave and finally tackling entitlement reform. But earlier today, on one of the morning shows, I heard my friend from Texas, Jeff Henseling, being finally candid about the Republicans' view of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. He called them cruel Ponzi schemes. So there we have it. This isn't about being brave or transformative or making a few changes to save the economy. Republicans are pushing the same agenda they've always had, ending the safety net programs that they view as fraudulent. And the Republican budget does exactly that. It ends Medicare and results in a huge cost shift and forces seniors to pay $6,000 per year out of pocket. It grants Medicaid. It block grants Medicaid, slashing nursing home aid, and will lead to 50 different benefit programs across the country. That takes us back to my childhood, when benefits in our country were determined by what state you may have been fortunate or unfortunate to have been born in. But the greatest fraud being committed is that these drastic and unfair changes don't even bring the Republican budget to balance. In fact, the Republican budget adds $8 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. Then where's all that money going, one might ask? While Republicans are gutting Medicare and Medicaid with one hand, they're giving tax breaks to all big oil companies and making tax cuts for the wealthy with the other hand. That's what I call a Ponzi scheme. Now, if you're wealthy or a special interest group, this is surely a pathway to prosperity. But if you're in your golden years, it's the road to ruin. Democrats have a plan to reduce the deficit in a steady, responsible way as we build a foundation for shared prosperity and long-term economic growth. In fact, the Democratic budget achieves primary balance by fiscal year 2018 and cuts the deficit by $1.2 trillion more than the President's budget. I proudly support the Democratic alternative budget. And now yield back.
The gentleman from Wisconsin.
At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield 15 seconds to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. McCotter.
Gentleman's recognized for 15 seconds.
I thank the gentleman. We have heard from the minority party that their budget seeks to harness the American people. Why? They have already saddled the American people with record spending, deficits, and debt. Just say nay. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to just say a few words about Medicare, if I can, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, I want to make it very clear that if you're 55 and over, there are no changes to you whatsoever. And we hear a lot about Medicare as we know it. Well, unfortunately, Medicare as we know it is going bankrupt. And if you are for the status quo with regard to Medicare, you are on the side of the elimination of Medicare as we know it. Another point I want to make is we hear a lot about cuts. These are Washington cuts. This is Washington cut speak. Where I'm from, if you get $5 on a Monday and the next day you get $10, that's an increase, not a cut. Most Americans would be appalled to know, Mr. Speaker, that the increases we're seeing are being called cuts. And I'm going to explain it to my folks when I get back to Arkansas. Medicare has not one penny of cuts in this budget. It continues to grow. With regard to the language about the vouchers, there's no voucher here. We're trying to give the folks that are 55 and under health care like members of Congress have. Have you ever, Mr. Speaker, heard anyone in Congress describe their own health care plan as a voucher? No, of course you haven't, because it's not. That word has been rolled out with the other tested words, privatization and all this other nonsense, for the purposes of politics. You don't want the American people, Mr. Speaker, to have the same health care that you have. I support this budget because it'll keep our promise to seniors, it'll save Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and it'll preserve this country for my kids.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge Republican members to read their own budget. It does not give seniors the same deal as members of Congress. Members of Congress have a fair share formula. Seniors do not under their bill. Seniors get an immediate cut to the prescription drug benefit to the extent that we close the donut hole, and they don't. Let's get our facts straight. With that, I yield 3 minutes to the chairman of the Democratic caucus, Mr. Larson.
The gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for how long? For 3 minutes.
I want to thank Chairman Van Hollen, and I want to thank Mr. Ryan for the conduct of this debate that's taken place. They are two exemplary examples of how debate and discussion should move forward and emanate here in the House of Representatives. Harry Truman said every segment of our population and every individual has the right to expect from his government a fair deal. I rise in strong support of the fair deal that's being proposed by the Democratic side in this debate. I rise because it helps us out with jobs and the economy and recognizes that we must deal with the deficit, but deal with it in a manner that makes sense. In my hometown, we go to a place called Augie and Ray's. In Augie's and Ray's, they want to know, whose side are you on in this? And when you take Medicare and end the program as we know it, and shift the burden of the deficit at a time when we need shared sacrifice to the elderly, is just flatly unfair. The social contract that the governed, that the people have with their government, is about shared sacrifice, but it's also about the guarantee. This is not about charts and statistics and flow charts. It's about people at the end of the day who are impacted by the decisions that we make, not by some economist theory, but about a guarantee from their government, a guarantee that if they pay in, at the end of the day, they are going to receive the benefits they have worked so hard for all of their lives. That guarantee shouldn't be two-tiered. That guarantee shouldn't cut off benefits immediately to some and postpone it for others. That's a guarantee we should be working to fix, not to end. And that is the fundamental difference in what's going on here today. My distinguished colleague, the leader, Mr. Clyburn, said, let's recognize what's going on here, the extreme differences that have existed in this party since Roosevelt became president. An end of Social Security, an end of Medicare, an end to Medicaid. That has been the goal of the other side. I stand in strong support of the Democratic alternative.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
At this time, Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield 2 minutes to our distinguished Chief Deputy Whip, Mr. Roscom from Illinois.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. My colleague from Connecticut talks about a guarantee. Well, there's one guarantee that is for sure, Mr. Chairman, and that is the guarantee that Medicare as we know it is a pipe dream into perpetuity. It's going broke. The guarantee that the Democratic House has brought us in the past is a guarantee that says 47% of our foreign debt our debt obligations are to foreigners. We are guaranteed right now to borrow 40 cents on every dollar unless we do something about it. So what do we do about it? You know, there's famous themes in literature that fast forward into the future. You get a glimpse of the reality of the future, and then we always love it when the hero comes back and says, oh, here's what's going on. There's a choice. Let's make a good choice, and let's move forward. Well, we don't need fiction today. What we need is the clear-eyed reality of what these numbers present to us, and they present to us a choice. We can either choose to do nothing, and I would say that is choosing, or we can choose to do something. We can choose to do a historic plan that brings a brightness to the economy, that creates jobs and opportunity, that doesn't mortgage our children's future to China, and ultimately puts the U.S. on a global competitive basis, the likes of which the world will have never seen. This is a time of choosing. Let's move forward and choose the House Republican plan, which makes guarantees and makes promises that we can keep with. I yield back.
The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a time of choosing, and our budget chooses to make investments in our kids rather than choosing to provide even bigger tax breaks to the very wealthy, and we choose to get rid of subsidies for oil companies instead of cutting nursing home funding through Medicare for seniors and disabled individuals. With that, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished ranking member of the International Affairs Committee, Mr. Berman.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Van Hollen. The Republican budget cuts the President's 2012 request for international affairs by $20 billion. That's 39% of the amount in diplomacy and development outside of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. While diplomacy and development account for only about 1% of the overall budget, under the Republican plan, this tiny portion of the budget would absorb a wildly disproportionate share of the cuts. Here's what it means on the ground. Taking AIDS patients off life-saving medication, withholding bed nets from children in malaria zones, and standing idly by during humanitarian emergencies. I know the chairman of the committee. I know he doesn't want to see those things happen, but the effect of his plan would make them happen. The Democratic alternative takes a wise and responsible approach to reducing the deficit. I urge my colleagues to support it and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Chair, at this time I'd like to yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, let's talk about Medicare for a moment. It's not as if we don't have a problem. We know Medicare is going broke in 9 years. We want to make sure that the people who've retired and who are 10 years away from retiring can bank on the promises that have been made for them. But to keep that promise, we have to reform it and save it for the next generation. So that's why we have a plan that says for people 54 and below, you too will have a plan of guaranteed Medicare coverage from guaranteed Medicare plans that you get to choose from. Choice and competition works. Prescription drug benefit. A bunch of plans that compete against each other for the seniors' business came in 41% below cost projections. Why? Because it's not a government-run program. It's not a bunch of bureaucrats. What is the President proposing? What are the Democrats proposing? Here's what they propose for current seniors. The President just gave us a glimpse of it 2 days ago. He wants to take this board of 15 people he appoints on this rationing board, and they make the decisions. They price control Medicare. They ration Medicare. $480 billion, almost $10,000 per senior on current seniors. We are saying don't do this to current seniors. Get rid of the rationing board, and don't delegate Medicare decision-making to 15 people appointed by the President with no congressional oversight. Let the 40 million seniors in Medicare be in charge of their Medicare program. And more importantly, we save Medicare, prevent its bankruptcy, and what does the other side do? They sit by and watch the program go bankrupt. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would remind my colleagues that the reason Medicare was created in the first place was because the private insurance industry wouldn't cover seniors at affordable care. That's what they want to go back to. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Neal.
Thank you very much. Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the Democratic resolution. Last week on the floor of the House, the Republican leader, Eric Cantor, asked a very important question. He asked, how did we get here? So I took the challenge. I went back and have carefully chronicled a series of votes, steps, and quotes from Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey and John Kasich and others who argued against the Clinton plan for balancing the budget. Remember, when Clinton left office, the clock in Times Square had been turned off. Alan Greenspan said, you're paying down the debt too quickly. So we've had 5 balanced budgets since 1969. 4 of them came with Bill Clinton. The prescription that was offered on January 20th of the Bush inauguration was massive tax cuts and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And our Republican friends ask, how did we get here? I am very optimistic about engaging this conversation now and as we get to the debt ceiling. Clinton walks out on January 19, 2001, 22 million jobs had been created. Economic growth averaged 4% per quarter. It was the greatest period of economic prosperity in the history of America.
Gentleman's time has expired.
And our friends on the other side now want to turn the clock back on that reality.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Langford.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I do appreciate the conversation about the balanced budgets in the past. Yes, Bill Clinton was the president there. He did sign that budget. But as this House knows above any other place, this House is very aware that budgets originate in the House of Representatives. So Republicans were leading the House of Representatives, pulling that budget together. We are proposing a similar thing again, that a Republican House can propose a budget, send it to a Democrat president. We work together to start balancing the budget again. So that formula that we just discussed, I believe, is a very good formula, and we should initiate that again and say, once again, a Republican House, do a great budget, send it over to a Democrat president, and be able to work their way through it. I would disagree with the cuts in defense. I think it is a very common statement that we can look and say there are issues with defense systems. There are issues with our acquisition process in defense. Where I would disagree is we should then take our defense and where we find savings, then move it over to deficit reductions. I represent an area around Tinker Air Force Base in Midwest City. It is a great base that is strategic to us. Those planes that fly out of there are 50-plus years old. There are some airmen that are flying with the same tail number that their grandfather flew 50 years ago. This is a moment when we should not be robbing from defense and saying we're going to use that for deficit reduction, that we need to be reinvesting. Robert Gates, our Secretary of Defense, has said there's $178 billion that he can find. $78 billion of that savings is applied to deficit reduction in the Republican plan, and $100 billion of it is reinvested back in the Defense Department. There are good ways to do this that leave America safe, that make strategic sense. We think we should do those things. And with that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I inquire as to how much time remains?
Gentleman from Maryland has 1 3/4 remaining, and the gentleman from Wisconsin, 6.5 minutes.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Who's next? Where's Mulvaney? There he is. Oh, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, a member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Mulvaney.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking my own chairman, Mr. Ryan, and also the ranking member, Mr. Van Hollen, for the entire process. It has been my first year. I have enjoyed it. We've had some spirited debates, and I know that we disagree more than we agree, but I've appreciated the opportunity to do this. I'll close with this. This will be the last opportunity I have to speak on this year's budget. We've heard a lot about the benefits that accrued to this nation during the Clinton administration. I, for one, am willing to give partial credit to the president at that time. It was a Democrat president. Yes, it was. It was a House of Representatives controlled by my party, and I think it was a formula that worked for the nation. We've heard a lot of things, though, about the importance of raising the tax rates back to the Clinton era in order to solve our problems. I would suggest to you that it was not the tax rates during the Clinton era that drove our prosperity at the time. I'll show you what President Clinton did to the size of the government workforce. President Clinton's elected right about here. A dramatic reduction in the size of the federal workforce. A dramatic reduction in the size of federal spending on people who work for the federal government. In fact, unprecedented in the last 30 years, done again under a Democrat president and a Republican House. What happened as a result? As spending as a percentage of our economy went down, the unemployment rate went down. As the government spent less, more people went back to work. As we sit here, we all agree that the discussion is really about jobs. There's nothing more telling than what happened during the Clinton administration as a formula for how to create jobs. The government needs to spend less. My question to my esteemed colleagues on this side of the aisle is, where is this type of leadership out of the White House these days? Where is this generation's Bill Clinton saying, let's spend less on government spending so that people go back to work? If we put President Obama's proposals, his current budget up here, it would be almost the exact opposite of what your party proposed only 20 years ago. Where is that type of leadership out of the White House? Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. I thank you for the opportunity.
Gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks time?
On this,
The gentleman from Wisconsin.
On this, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Garrett from New Jersey.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman and thank the Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the Democrats' substitute amendment. And let me just quickly here sum up the Democrats' prescription, if you will, for our nation's fiscal troubles. Basically includes what? More spending, more debt, more taxes on hardworking families and small businesses. And so while the Democrat budget has lower deficits than, well, the President's budget, you really need to take a closer look at how they achieve this and how they achieve the deficit reduction compared to the White House's budget. Let's take a look at it. First, well, they raised taxes again. How much? $208 billion more than the President's taxes on all Americans. Then what do they do next? They cut the defense budget. By how much? $614 billion, again, relative to the President's budget over the 10-year window. Now, at the same time, we already had Secretary Gates, who has already said that we need to cut defense budget by $78 billion. They want to cut defense by $614 billion on top of that. And what about additional to that? Well, in their budget, if you go into it and look, there's about $400 billion in unspecified saving. Unspecified. Here at the 12th hour, they still can't decide how they want to try to rein in spending? Well, of course not, because they really honestly don't want to do so. I believe that budgets must be credible, and the Democrats' budget doesn't pass that test at all. You know, the only specific savings in the budget come from how? Raising taxes again on Americans and cutting the defense budget. You know, the Democrat budget does not tackle even the drivers behind our deficits. What are they? It does not address the pending bankruptcy, yes, bankruptcy, of Medicare and Medicaid. The Democrat budget is nothing more than punting, which is exactly what the administration and the White House have been doing as well. Now look, the American people want Congress to do the right thing. American people want us to get spending, want us to get deficits. They want us to get our debt here in Washington under control, just as American families have to get their spending, deficit, and debt under control, just as small businesses across this country have to get it under control. The Democrats' budget is frankly an embarrassment and shows that the other side is not serious about taking our fiscal challenges seriously.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
I would ask the chairman, do you have any more speakers?
Just myself.
May I inquire of the chair how much time is left?
1 3/4 minutes remaining for the gentleman from Maryland.
I yield myself 3/4 of a minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 45 seconds.
What we heard just doesn't fit the facts. In fact, our budget does make cuts to domestic programs, but we do not do it in a meat-axe way. We make cuts to agriculture subsidies. We do tax reform, as the Commission recommended, getting rid of a lot of clutter in the tax code for special interests. That is what we do. With respect to defense, our numbers track what the President was saying the other day, but we do get rid of a so-called overseas contingency fund, which we think our Republican friends would like to join us on, which gives the executive branch a blank check to undertake any military operations whatsoever for the next 10 years. Don't have to ask Congress. That's what we do. What we don't do, we don't end the Medicare guarantee. What we don't do, we don't keep giving subsidies to oil companies while we cut education for kids. That's what we don't do. I yield 1 minute to our very distinguished Democratic leader, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I commend him and the members of the Budget Committee for their hard work to bring legislation to the floor to enable us to have this debate yesterday and today, and I think for a long time to come. We have said it over and over again. A budget should be a statement of our national values. A federal budget should. It should reflect what is important to us as we allocate the resources, investments for the future. As much has been said about this deficit, and I want to join the distinguished ranking member before I go any further in correcting the record. I listened with great interest at members on the other side taking credit for the Clinton administration balanced or budgets in surplus. And I remind them or tell them, because many of them may not know, that those budgets were a result of the 1993 budget vote that we took on this floor of the House without one Republican vote, which was the source of fiscal discipline, job creation. Again, as other speakers have said, over 20 million jobs created. So when I hear the Republicans say it's the Clinton presidency and the Republican Congress, no, it was the Democratic Congress, because we know that deficit reduction is essential. We had to stop the budget deficits that President Clinton inherited, and now we have to stop the budget deficits that President Obama inherited. And budget deficits, I've heard our colleagues say, are immoral. I quite agree. We have a responsibility and an obligation to our children and our grandchildren not to send them any bills, personal or official, and we do not intend to do so. But they were immoral during the Bush years, too, when they were giving tax cuts to the rich, 2 unpaid-for wars, a prescription drug benefit that gave away the store to the private sector and sent the bill to the taxpayer. So here we are with a choice on the floor. Some of it was spoken, a vision of it was shared with the nation by President Obama the other day. He talked about America that was an America of greatness, that cared about its people. He talked about the essential need for us to reduce the deficit. He talked about growth and investments in job creation. He talked about being fair to our seniors and keeping our promise to them. And in the budgets that we have before us today, one presented by Mr. Van Hollen, one presented by the Republicans, we see a sharp contrast, one that supports the vision that the President put forth, one that definitely does not. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about the budget deficit, but we also, in doing so, if we're going to do right by the American people, have to recognize that there are other deficits. We have a deficit in education. We have a deficit in innovation, because innovation begins in the classroom. We have a deficit in investments in our infrastructure. All of these investments have a payoff back to us. They create growth, they bring revenue to the Treasury, and they help reduce the deficit. It is a false economy to think that we can write a budget that cuts serious investments in education, infrastructure, innovation, and the rest, and think that we're going to end the deficit. You cannot cut your way out of it. You cut, you grow, and you increase revenue. And that's the subject that I'll hold for when we talk about the Republican budget more specifically. What is important to note, if you had one thing to know about the difference between the Democrats and Republicans in terms of these budgets, if you had just one thing, it would be on the subject of Medicare. The Republican budget breaks the promise that this country has made to seniors, that after a lifetime of work, they will be able to depend on Medicare to protect them in retirement. But in this, the plan here ends Medicare as we know it and dramatically reduces benefits for seniors. It forces seniors to buy their insurance from the health insurance companies, where the average senior would be forced to pay twice as much for half the benefit, as much as for some $20,000 a year. I want to call the attention of my colleagues to this chart. Senior citizens' health costs skyrocket under Republican budget. Blue is the government share, red is the beneficiary share. Health care spending for a typical 65-year-old in 2022 in dollars. Republican budget would have $8,000 from the federal government, $12,500 from the individual, which is more than twice what the Medicare cost should be to a senior, $6,150. twice as much for less in benefits. Now, this chart is not our chart. This information was conveyed to the Republican chairman of the Budget Committee, Mr. Ryan, by the director of the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, in a letter to him describing what the cost would be to seniors under his plan. I just don't think that is fair to our seniors. This plan has the wrong priorities. It's focused on helping corporate special interest and Wall Street, not reducing the deficit or helping the country. It raises taxes for the middle class while cutting them for the wealthiest in our country. It repeals Wall Street reforms for the big banks. It abolishes Medicare as we know it, cuts funding for education, health care, alternative energy, and job training programs, and uses the money not for reducing the deficit, but to help the most privileged. Help the most privileged and negate what we did in our health care bill, which was to start to close the donut hole. If you are a senior and you see that your prescription drug costs will come down under the health care bill and the donut hole will close, this budget reverses that. So there's so many reasons for seniors and people with disabilities and people who care about Medicare to be concerned. Medicare is a bedrock of stability for our seniors, for their health, for their economic security, for those with disabilities who depend on it. We must make sure that it is solvent, but we must not charge seniors more while give bigger tax cuts to the wealthy. Just remember these 3 points. First of all, it abolishes Medicare as we know it, increasing costs to seniors, while it gives tax breaks of tens of billions of dollars to big oil. Changes in Medicaid will send seniors out of nursing homes, while we give tax breaks to companies that send jobs overseas. This Ryan budget, the Republican budget, will hurt education, cut the education of our children, increase the cost of higher education for young adults by near 10 million young adults, while we give tax cuts to the wealthiest. That's just not the American way. The President said in his remarks that we're about shared responsibility and shared sacrifice. We're about a sense of community in our country. And so as we want to reduce the deficit, the fiscal deficit, and we must, and we have proven, Democrats have proven that we can, this proposal does not. But what Mr. Van Hollen is proposing in the positive sense is one that recognizing that we need to reduce the deficit, growth is a part of that, so we have investments in education and the innovation that springs from that, and other initiatives that grow our economy, that strengthen the middle class, that creates jobs as it reduces the deficit. I urge our colleagues to vote yes on Mr. Van Hollen's budget and no on the Republican budget to strengthen the middle class. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
The gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield myself the balance of my time. First, let me start off by saying the only way in which the word oil is mentioned in this budget is not in the tax code. It is that we want to drill for more of it in this country so we can lower gas prices and get ourselves off foreign oil. Let me address Medicare briefly. I have here the Federal Employee Benefit Handbook that everybody in Congress, every federal employee has. Nowhere in this book says voucher. Look at all these plans we get to choose from. Kaiser, Aetna, Humana, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Coventry, pages and pages of choices and options. This is what we're talking about for people 54 and below. Guess what? Biggest threat to Medicare is the status quo. Medicare goes bankrupt in 9 years. And so is this exactly like the Federal Employee Health Plan? No, it's not. It's the same kind of plan. Because what we say is in the future, people who are wealthy don't need as much of a subsidy. People who are sick need more. People who are low income need more, and they get complete out-of-pocket coverage. More for the sick, more for the poor, less for the wealthy, in a solvent Medicare system. But more importantly, The people choose. Medicare beneficiaries choose. What's the president's plan? What's the Democrats' plan? Appoint 15 people to do the choosing. It is a different philosophy. Should we have 15 unelected bureaucrats run Medicare, ration Medicare, or should we allow 40 to 50 million seniors make the decision? Let's talk about taxes. Look at all these budgets we've been looking at today. By the way, our budget doesn't even cut taxes. I wish I could say it was. Revenues still rise. About $12 trillion under this budget. We just don't want to go up and up and up. The budget we have here is a $2 trillion tax increase. The plan we had before, the progressive plan, $16 trillion tax increase. The Congressional Black Caucus budget, $6 trillion tax increase. This budget cuts defense $619 billion. The progressive budget, $1.2 trillion. The CBC budget cuts defense $469 billion.
Would the
CBC budget, I don't have time. The CBC budget increases spending on domestic spending $4.1 trillion. The Progressive Caucus increases domestic spending $11.4 trillion. The Democratic budget increases relative to the mark $4.6 trillion. So we've got it. We know where they are. More spending on everything but cut and gut defense and raise taxes a lot. I won't, but I'll talk to you later.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired. The chair would announce that on the last recorded vote, the number of members recording as present was 172. The question now is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Maryland. Those in favor say aye. And those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that I ask for the yeas and nays.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
And this is the last vote on an alternative plan to the 2012 budget. This is the Democratic leadership plan, and it's a 15-minute vote. Following this, 20 minutes of wrap-up debate, and a final vote is ahead. During this vote, we're going to ask you your thoughts about the differences between the Democratic plan and Republican plan, particularly on where the plans call for cuts in the budget. Republicans, you should call 202-585-3885. Democrats, it's 202-585-3886. Independents and others, 202-585-3887. We will get to your calls momentarily. Make sure you mute your television when you get through on the line, and we look forward to hearing from you. You heard Speaker Gingrey, Mr. Gingrey, mention the last vote and the number of those voting present. If you were here and watching on the last vote, things got a little noisy on the House floor. Michael O'Brien in the Hill writes that House lawmakers defeated a proposal by conservative Republicans to make deeper cuts to spending and tax rates than those proposed in the Republican budget, but only after last-minute maneuvering by Democrats on the floor. He says in a chaotic scene filled with shouting more typical of that which takes place in the British Parliament, the Republican Study Committee alternative to Representative Ryan's 2012 budget went down by a vote of 119 to 136. It was gavelled shut only after Democratic leaders started pushing members to switch their no votes to present. A total of 172 voted present. And here's a little bit of what that vote looked like at the end just a short while ago.
Off no on present for Mr. Frank of Massachusetts. Mr. George Miller of California. Off no on present for Mr. George Miller of California. Mr. Lipinski. Off no on present for Mr. Lipinski. Mr. McDermott. Off no on present for Mr. McDermott. Mr. Payne. Off no on present for Mr. Payne. Mr. Conyers. Mr. Conyers votes present. Mr. Honda. Off no on present for Mr. Honda. Mr. Lynch. Off no on present for Mr. Lynch. Mr. McNerney. Off no on present for Mr. McNerney. Mr. Waxman. Off no on present for Mr. Waxman. Mrs. McMorris Rogers. Off aye on no for Mrs. McMorris Rogers. Mr. Clyburn. Off no on present for Mr. Clyburn. Mrs. Bono Mack. Off aye on no for Mrs. Bono Mack. Mr. Rothman. Off no on present for Mr. Rothman of New Jersey. Mr. Pascrell. Off no on present for Mr. Pascrell.
Ready? Yes. Close, Kevin.
On this vote, the yeas are 120.
They're open.
Mr. Michaud. Off no on present for Mr. Michaud. Mr. Dreyer. Off aye on no for Mr. Dreyer.
Close.
On this vote, the yeas are 119, the nays are 136. The amendment is not adopted.
Well, Phil Gingrey of Georgia with his hands full there as Speaker Pro Tem on that vote from earlier this hour. That was on the Republican Study Committee alternative, the alternative 2012 budget. The final vote was 119 to 136 with 172 members voting present. The Hill's Michael O'Brien writes that members of Republican leadership flipped their votes in the closing moments of the proposal to help defeat the proposal. The Kathy Morris of Washington switched her vote from yes to no at the last minute, as did David Dreyer. Well, let's hear your thoughts on the two budgets that are playing out here. The Democratic version is getting a vote now, and the final passage vote coming up next. First up here is Akron, Ohio. Justin on our Republican line. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. How are you today?
Good afternoon to you, too. Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I must say, I'm not impressed with either party, frankly, but the Democrats, of course, present themselves as spoiled little children with temper tantrums constantly and scare tactics, and I think they think this is like 1960, where people were really buying this nonsense that somehow Republicans hate children and old people, and I don't know. I feel like I must live in a different world where I'm trying to figure out who listens to that rhetoric and really believes it. Similar to the president's speech the other day. Do people really believe that Republicans don't like children and old people? I mean, it's absurd. We have a serious financial problem, and it seems like there's only one party that's interested in fixing it.
Let's go to Buckingham, Virginia next up. Jean's on our Democrats line.
Yes, good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Democrat, and for that gentleman that just spoke, I'm 65. I've worked 35 years. I do not want the Republicans messing with my Medicare. I am not stupid. I am not senile. And I know just what they're doing. They're looking out for the rich and taking down the poor. Now, if they care so much about the children, why are they trying to cut the Head Start programs? And they don't care anything about me. They wish I would die. But listen very well. I'm going to live another 65 years. And I'm going to tell you this. I worked 35 years to my Medicare. Keep your hands off Republicans.
Let's go to our independent line next, and this is New York City. Michael, hello. New York, you're on the air.
Yes, oh, thank you. Yes, I just listened to that young lady who says she's 65. Tell her I don't believe, from observing, and I do observe quite a bit, that the Republicans are looking to take away her seniors, her Medicare, or her Social Security. In fact, if she paid attention, she'd know that 55 and above wouldn't be touched. This is from 54 and below, okay? That we're trying to save Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, okay? We have to do something because we are going broke. I believe the gentleman prior to her spoke very well, and he articulated it very well, okay? These scare tactics don't work. And as far as the 1960s, I grew up in the 60s. I was a long-haired hippie, okay? I guess you call those people now liberals. I don't consider myself a liberal. I may consider myself more as a libertarian, or that's why I'm an independent. But the bottom line is the Republicans at least have a plan. What the president did the other day was despicable, okay? Beneath of the president of this country, okay? He should have, I would believe, come out with a constructive, if he had constructive criticism towards Republican Ryan's plan, then he should have came out with it.
On that plan that the president announced the other day, the debt and deficit reduction plan, apparently Republicans on the Senate Budget Committee are now asking the president to submit a revised 2012 budget. February the 14th. And here on the House floor, the members are voting on the Democratic alternative. Next up, about 20 minutes of debate, and then a final passage vote. This is really just the start of the process, because the budget resolution is the blueprint for federal spending, which will be worked out through separate legislation in the appropriations committees, the various subcommittees of appropriations. Let's go next to Lunenburg, Vermont. And on our Republican line, who's on the line with us here from Vermont?
I'm Diane, and it's Lunenburg, Vermont.
Lunenburg, okay. Thanks for the correction.
Thank you for C-SPAN, the best reality show on TV. Woohoo! I have a question about Social Security. People keep saying hands off Social Security. It's a safety net. When it was created for seniors who had gone through the Depression. I mean, there was really no way for them to save for retirement. They were indeed in dire straits. That's really not the case anymore. People have more opportunity now. They're living longer. They have second careers after retiring from the original job. I don't see the need for it as much as we had before, as far as a blanket program for everyone. So I think a lot can be done there. Also, for a procedural question, and maybe you can help me, Nancy Pelosi was given 1 minute to finish up the time. She went on for nearly 6.
Well, that's a common courtesy on the House floor. Generally, they will do that for the leadership of both parties.
Really? Did it come out of Mr. Ryan's time?
I can't tell you that.
I think it did, because he had 6 minutes, and then all of a sudden he was down to 2. So I was just curious about that.
It didn't come out of his time.
I was waiting and waiting for her to get done, and then 6 minutes later, it's like, oh my gosh.
You'll see that. You'll see that often, particularly on major legislation, when the leaders
okay. Well,
of the
thank you so much.
Thanks for calling in. Let's go to Tulare, California, and Jane. No, we go to Libsyn City, North Carolina, and Mac, Democratic caller. Hi.
Hi, yes. I want to make a comment on the health care itself, because I don't think they should mess with it at all. I think it should stay the same. I think if they quit spending money over in Iraq and Pakistan and stuff like that and use it for what it needs here in the U.S., I think we'll be just fine.
Our previous caller had asked about Social Security, and in comparing the two, Representative Ryan's and President Obama's budget, The Wall Street Journal writes about Social Security. Paul Ryan's plan would require the President and a Board of Trustees of Social Security to submit a plan to Congress for restoring the balance to the fund if it isn't sustainable. President Obama's 2012 budget asked Congress to work together to overhaul Social Security, but it rules out privatization and benefit cuts for current or future beneficiaries. That's the difference between the two on Social Security anyway. A couple more calls here. We go next to Findlay, Ohio, and Robert on our independent line.
Yes, hello. This is about Social Security. I am 70 years old. I depend on the Social Security, and especially with them not touching it, but they keep doing it. The last 2 years, they have taken away our cost of living increase. Now they want to do away with Social Security and Medicare. I don't think it's right.
All right, let's go to California on our Republican line. Jane, what's the name of your city there in California?
Tulare?
Tulare, California. Go ahead, Jane.
Hi there. I just wanted to comment on Ryan. He is doing such a good job. I hope he continues it. We don't need Obama to take so much tax money. I mean, I even heard that the rich are going to be taxed out of their tax write-offs that they make. They won't be able to get tax write-offs when they donate to charities, even though Obama says he wants to do that. You know, he wants to help people, and that's what he's doing with this new law and bill and all of these budgets. And he's going to really mess up a lot of people getting their charities if he does that to the rich people.
Well, Paul Ryan's plan in their statement and summary says they would keep taxes low so the economy can grow. They would eliminate roughly $800 billion in tax increases proposed by the president's health care law. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, the proposal by Chris Van Hollen, the Democratic budget makes permanent the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts for working Americans. That's individuals with incomes below $200,000 and couples below $250,000, but does not extend the tax cuts for those with higher incomes. Let's take 2 more calls here. Naples, Florida is next, and Mary on our Democrats line.
I would just like to comment on the logic of not charging people for giving away our revenue and then allowing those people that have the wealthiest amount of money to escape with our money, not pay into our system. We've had more job losses than we've ever had. As far as charity, as the other lady said, they're not charitable. They write it off, and we pay for what they select as a charity for humanities. Not correct. It is not correct to not fairly tax people. And if these companies and the threat of them losing money and we won't give them benefits, they want to leave us, say goodbye. Europe will line up. Other companies that appreciate, and industrials that appreciate making money in this country will want to be here.
Thanks, Mary. Let's go one more caller here. Todd in Clarkston, Washington on our independent line.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. When I see both Republicans and Democrats going at each other, they're not really keying in on what really is going to make our country prosper. What I would want to say is we need to bring back in our manufacturing of goods and products, and even oil. We need to get our military out of the Middle East. I mean, I would rather work with our own environmental groups to drill our oil and compete. We need to be competing with other countries, not competing between Democrats and Republicans here in our own citizens.
Todd, thanks for weighing in. Thanks for all the comments. And a reminder that you can continue the conversation online. Today we are live streaming coverage of the U.S. House. Go to facebook.com/cspan, and there is an active and ongoing discussion about the proceedings on the floor, and you can participate as well. Just check in and chat. You'll see the bar there as you go to Facebook. Again, ahead, 20 minutes of debate, wrap-up debate on 2012 spending, and a final passage vote still to come on the House floor.
On this vote, the yeas are...
Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Schock. Mr. Schock votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 166, the nays are 259. The amendment is not adopted. Pursuant to the rule, it is now in order to consider a final period of general debate, which will not exceed 20 minutes, equally divided between the chair and a ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ryan, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin. The committee will be in order. Members, please clear the well, clear the aisles.